Okay, so giving it a bit of time. I will begin introducing ourselves, and then we can kick off with the webinar. Thank you very much, everyone who's joined or who's in the process of joining us. My name is Sue Allchurch, and I run outreach and engagement at the UN Global Compact. And I'm here with my colleagues from Accenture. We'll be hosting this session today, hopefully an interactive webinar for a chance to have questions and hear the information that we have going forward. So, first of all, a little bit about the UN Global Compact before we go into the details of the webinar today. So for those of you who don't know, we are the United Nations Corporate Sustainability Initiative, essentially, and we work with companies all around the world to help them achieve their business and their sustainability objectives by running their business according to these principles, which cover human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption. We now have over 18,000 companies who've joined and have committed to these principles and work together with us to help deliver UN Sustainable Development Goals. We're present across 160 countries, and we have about over 60, coming out 65 now, local networks all around the world, and 14 in Asia Pacific, they're all growing, and a lot of increasing interest from companies across Asia Pacific. So a little bit about what we're actually going to go to do today. We have a very exciting webinar with a lot of really interesting content for you all. And this is basically it's all built around our private sector Sustainable Development Goal report that we did this year in partnership with Accenture. They're going to take you through the details. My colleagues here, Michael Hughes and Amelia Hull, will take you through the details and outcomes and what we've learned from this study. But essentially, the reason we did it is because we are halfway on our journey towards 2030, which is the year that we need to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals by. So halfway in, we wanted to see how much progress has been made in the world, and then most particularly, what progress has been made by the private sector. And this is the work that our colleagues here at Accenture have helped us with. Some really excellent and some illuminating information. After that, I will take you through a little bit more about what we know, the focus areas that we'd like to work with businesses to really try and deliver those goals, because we have to move faster and step up our ambition. And after that, we're going to have enough time for Q&A. So please think about that as we're going through the presentation. Any thoughts and questions that you have, we are going to have time at the end. In terms of, I just want to show you a little bit about how we're going to take those questions. First of all, the webinar will be recorded, and we will share with you all the slides and the recording afterwards, so you're able to go back, study it yourself, look at the slides, and afterwards can also ask us any more questions. Throughout this session now, do record any questions. What we'd like you to do is to put them in the Q&A session. We'll be able to keep track of them all the way through. Anything that we can't respond to today, we'll definitely follow up afterwards with. So please keep the questions going. We'll keep track during the presentation. So now we're going to deep dive into the private sector report itself, the specifics of the data that has been pulled together by Accenture. And as I mentioned to you before, my two colleagues from Accenture will take you through this. Michael Hughes, who is the UN Programs Lead, and also Amelia Hull, who is the UN Affairs Manager, both of whom at Accenture have been the driving force behind moving this project forward. So over to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Sue, and appreciate everyone joining us today to hear a bit more about the private sector SDG stocktake. We were thrilled to partner with the UN Global Compact to publish this analysis of private sector contributions to the SDGs. As Sue mentioned, we are at the midway point of the Sustainable Development Goals, and it was critical to really understand the private sector's involvement with the SDGs, especially given the significant role the private sector plays in driving progress. So in order to conduct a proper assessment, we utilized a variety of data sources to assess private sector impact and sentiment that makes this report one of the most current, comprehensive, and evidence-based analyses of the private sector's contributions to the SDGs that's currently available. To get us started, I wanted to provide a quick orientation about how the research is structured. So the report is divided into two primary sections. The first is a retrospective. It focuses on how the private sector contributed thus far to the SDGs. Within that, there is a macro level overview of how the business has contributed at a global level, as well as a detailed per SDG analysis for those interested in diving into particular goals. This detail by SDG really focuses on three elements: the state of the world when it comes to an SDG across all sectors, public, private, and civil, the key ways the private sector has contributed to the SDGs, as well as a more detailed breakdown of how the private sector has impacted the SDGs through their overall contribution, as well as the revenue alignment, which is driving impact. My teammate Amelia will share a little bit more about this here in a little bit. The second part, by contrast, focuses on how we're accelerating action moving forward. So we looked at 10 key pathways really to provide business leaders insight on how we can really advance the overall efforts that we're taking. Many of these are linked to Forward Faster, which is an UNGC initiative, which you'll hear about as well today. For each pathway, we've detailed out what that pathway is, the potential for change it offers, the specific actions companies can take, as well as some case studies for those who are leading the way. So how did we go about delivering this particular analysis? So if we move to the methodology, when we first began this collaboration with the UN Global Compact, as well as our partners at UNDESA, IOE, ICC, and WBCSD, we really focused on tackling a two-part question. What has been the contribution to the private sector thus far, and how can we accelerate action moving forward? Now, given the expansive nature of both of those questions, we really needed to embrace different methodologies to focus the analysis and better understand how the private sector was impacting the SDGs. So this included surveying over 2,800 business leaders from all over the world to better understand their perceptions around the opportunities, the challenges, and the enablers when it comes to the SDGs. We partnered with a number of third-party data providers, in particular Impact, Util, and ESG Book, to leverage their data sources to better understand the private sector's overall contributions. We conducted several original macroeconomic impact assessments to identify the potential of specific actions, testing our recommendations that we might put forward. And there was also an extensive secondary research effort looking across various reports and articles. We also looked at earnings call trends. We went with issue experts within the UN system and beyond. And we looked at those case studies around companies that are taking action today. So with that context, let's go ahead and jump into the findings. So when we think about the state of the world, we'll first look at how the private sector is viewing the SDGs while navigating a pretty diverse set of global challenges that the private sector is currently facing. Now, as we think about those business challenges, on a positive note, businesses really do believe in the SDGs and their crucial role in achieving them. Well over 90% agree that the SDGs represent that unifying vision of a more sustainable and equitable world, and understand the critical role businesses play in achieving that vision. However, globally, they have lost confidence in our ability to achieve the goals by 2030, with only half of our respondents saying that we can achieve the SDGs by 2030, and a similar figure believing enough has been done. However, we can see a significantly more optimistic sentiment within our respondents from Asia, who are much more confident we'll be able to achieve the SDGs, which was great to see. Now, if we think about this declining confidence overall, it is a bit of a reflection of the progress we've seen to date, with the latest reports showing that 85% of the SDGs are currently off track. There is therefore a lot of work for us to do in the remaining 7 years. Now, part of what is influencing those statistics is a complex set of barriers, both structural and cyclical, that are pulling attention and resources away from contributing to the SDGs. Some of these cyclical barriers, such as inflation or geopolitical instability, are competing priorities that are really taking away from the urgency we have around the SDGs. We also have structural limitations, such as an inability to influence the supply chain, unclear measurement resources, limited access or poor quality when it comes to data. And all this is really limiting a business leader's ability to take action on the SDGs. And so these are barriers we can concentrate on solving in the remaining 7 years, and which could potentially be addressed through policymaker changes and progress, which we'll get to as well. Now, as we think about those barriers and challenges and the exponential rate of change we're seeing globally, we'll have to deploy every tool available to us to meet our goals by 2030. One of the main ones we'll look towards are various technologies that can make us more efficient, give us greater insights to make better decisions, and develop new innovations we need. There is certainly a fair amount of confidence in the possibilities with technology, with many business leaders feeling that they can deploy new technologies. These technologies have freed up investment capital for them to make new products and services better aligned with the SDGs, and it's ultimately enhancing their profitability and ability to innovate. Some of the more high impact technologies in the view of our respondents included data analytics, movement to cloud computing, the Internet of Things, mobile devices, as well as artificial intelligence. Now, as always with technology, in particular, many of the emerging solutions we're seeing, we do want to safeguard against possible negative or unintended consequences, whether that's data bias, misinformation, or contributing to further inequality. We always want to be mindful of how these tools are used and the communities that engage with them. Now, I'm going to pass things over to my colleague, Amelia, to share a bit more about the impact assessments we conducted in this research. Amelia, over to you.
Thank you so much. So initially, as Michael already mentioned, for the retrospective, we really wanted to focus on what has a private sector contribution been thus far. As you can imagine, that is quite a hard question to answer. So in addition to our own research, we also partnered with various data providers who are able to essentially give us a few more insights into various ways that the private sector has contributed thus far. Using 3 specific data providers, we're able to triangulate the private sector contributions at a high level. The first one showing here is impact. With impact, we were essentially looking at how the private sector has impacted the SDGs across 40 various topics. And we're able to essentially gain insights in terms of an SDG by SDG lens, as well as a sector by sector lens. At a high level, the private sector has powered economic growth, fulfilling its primary role as an economic engine. In addition, it has driven positive impact on social-related SDGs, especially if you look at SDG 2 and SDG 7. This has primarily been fueled in low and middle income countries in terms of poverty reduction, educational gains, as well as clean energy. However, this has come at the cost of the environment. If we see, nearly all the environmentally related SDGs are towards the bottom in terms of negative effect. This is primarily because despite the increasing attention to items such as carbon emissions, we're still seeing a very large negative impact here. So taking a step backwards, if you look at the overall impact of the private sector, it's driving economic growth at the expense of the environment. You can see here on SDG by SDG lens. However, in addition to an impact, we wanted to look, next slide please, at how the private sector is impacting the SDGs through their portfolio. So by partnering with Util, another data provider, we're able to evaluate companies' portfolio. So that's their product and their service portfolio for negative and positive impact. So this is an additional lens that we're able to evaluate. Overall, this does reflect a very similar trend in terms of driving positive economic advancement at the cost of the environment. However, in addition, there are some bright spots here. In particular, deep investments in clean energy, technology, and development are creating lots of positive impact when it comes to SDG 7, focusing on affordable and clean energy. Furthermore, there has been a strong push in the private sector in terms of inclusive product design, which has enabled broader quality, though there is still some room for improvement. In addition to looking at the private sector's impacts, when we think about the SDG by SDG lens as well as the sector lens, we also want to see what they're measuring. So in the next slide, we focus more on essentially mapping out what the private sector, what companies are reporting on, because as we all know, what gets measured matters. So here we partnered with ESG Book to map over 200 metrics to their relevant SDGs to better understand what companies are reporting on a regular basis from each sector and seeing which SDG they're focusing their efforts on. This analysis shows that companies are playing to their strengths, oftentimes reporting on economic growth, responsible consumption, as well as partnerships. However, several of the social SDGs in particular, such as poverty, hunger, and education, are only tackled by select industries, with the private sector as a whole not reporting on these topics as much. This is good insights for policymakers and governments as they look to where they might want to provide guidance in terms of helping the private sector take more action in certain areas. So if we take a step back and we look at all three of these data providers and what they're telling us in terms of private sector impact on the SDGs, we can see on the next slide that the private sector is powering economic growth and job creation, but it is coming at the expense of the environment. And all of this is further exacerbating social inequalities and spillover effects. Now, if we look at Asia specifically, we're seeing a couple of additional trends. First, as Michael mentioned, there's SDG optimism. So overall in this area, business leaders are more optimistic that we will be meeting those targets in time. Second is value chain concerns. So business leaders in Asia are prioritizing innovation and upskilling when it comes to where they're focusing on contributing to the SDGs. But in terms of barriers and where they want to prioritize education and whatnot, it really comes to value chain. How can we make sure that we have a strong, robust, sustainable value chain and we're taking care of the people as well as the environmental effects? Third, when we look at the government and the UN regulation lens, while leaders in Asia are less pro-government intervention and policies compared to their global peers, they do have higher expectations of the United Nations. Following governments, the United Nations is the second stakeholder that they've ranked highest in terms of wanting further engagement. Now, if we look at what businesses are doing currently, the positive thing is that a lot of leading businesses have taken action and are taking action. Over 90% of business leaders have made a public commitment to the SDGs. Just shy of 80% have said that they have already identified a business case for advancing at least one SDG, if not multiple. And around 80% or exactly 78% of business leaders have stated that they've already changed a product or service offering to align closer to the SDGs. So we are seeing a lot of action from the business sector. This does, of course, also mirror the action that is happening in Asia in particular, especially around changing product portfolios and aligning with the SDGs. However, businesses cannot do this alone, and they are relying increasingly on governments. Over 80% of business leaders say that insufficient policy incentives pose a barrier to them taking action to the SDG and are clearly wanting more engagement from governments and policymakers, with 44% of business leaders saying governments in particular are a key stakeholder that they would like to engage with more. When we delve a little bit further into this, we asked business leaders about certain policies, and 9 policies in particular stood out. 4 towards the top are around consistent sustainable reporting, mandatory disclosures, and items more on the social side. The 5 policies on the bottom in particular deal with environmental action, where a lot of business leaders do believe that policy is a key unlock here, from shifting subsidies through to mandatory disclosure of water and carbon and nature. However, in addition to that, there is a lot that business themselves need to be able to do and need to be able to step up to do. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Michael to talk about the 10 key pathways he previously alluded to.
Thanks, Amelia. So now that Amelia has shared some of our asks of policymakers, what can the business community do to accelerate action? So as part of this piece of work, we identified 10 pathways to take on our road to 2030. These are anchored in 3 key themes: expand, transform, and scale. Within expand, we're focused on expanding the benefits of markets to really drive greater equity and inclusion within society across items such as the adoption of a living wage, promotion of gender equality, along with a recommitment to fundamental issues such as human rights, as well as a recognition that we need to innovate responsibly, tying back to the technology discussion we had a little while ago. As we look to transform, how do we think about shifting from our more extractive economic system today and change the workings of business to more positively contribute to environmental sustainability? So in this, we look towards accelerating climate action, advancing water resilience, and investing in circularity. And finally, with scale, how do we develop new incentive models that really reframe the measures of success when it comes to risk, return on investment, and impact? For this, we'll look towards the adoption of sustainable corporate finance, as well as the strengthening of sustainability leadership characteristics throughout the organization. Now, each of these pathways is covered in more depth in the report. And as a company, really try to consider where you are on your sustainability journey. What would make the biggest impact for you as an organization? And that'll help decide some of the prioritization that'll happen as you think about these 10 pathways. So that'll conclude our overview of the report. But I'm going to pass it over to Sue, who's going to share a bit more about how the UN Global Compact is helping companies mobilize towards 2030. So Sue, back to you.
Thanks very much, Michael, and thank you very much, Amelia, for that introduction and that thorough review. And also thank you very much for all the data. As I said, everyone, this is on the website. You can download the report, and there's lots of fantastic information here to get into. So yes, as Michael said, we're going to now look a little bit about the focus that the Global Compact is putting on and the resources and the support that we can give to help companies deliver their business results as well as their sustainability goals. So again, remembering that we're halfway towards 2030, and you've heard from Michael earlier on that actually, although we're halfway there, we're not nearly halfway in terms of delivering on our goals. Only 15% of our goals are really on track. So we want to understand what it is that's really holding us back and what more do we need to do to go forward. So first of all, there's a repeat of numbers that you've already seen deliberately. We know that there is a lot of commitment around the world from the business community to help deliver these goals. First of all, like 96% of businesses believe, everyone really, that the private sector is playing a crucial role and has to in terms of delivery of the goals. So that's great. And you've just seen as well from Amelia's presentation, nearly 80% have identified a business case for at least one sustainable development goal. And about 80% again have changed the product or service to align to the goals. So what we see is we're not on track, and yet there's a lot of commitment and a lot of energy and a lot of passion. So what's going on? Well, if you look at these next slide, this is very simply the problem. Less than half of business themselves believe that the private sector is doing enough. So this is CEOs and business leaders themselves saying, we're not really doing enough. So, okay, let's see what that means. Well, while we know that 91% of companies that we survey through this review have made a public commitment to at least one SDG. So that's pretty good. But here's the issue. 40% believe that agree that they're making goals that are ambitious enough to deliver sustainable development goals. So what we're seeing is a lot of commitment, a lot of passion, a lot of energy, and a lot of drive, making some commitments, but the commitments aren't high enough. And again, this is companies themselves calling it out, sort of saying, yeah, I know we need to do more. So we're trying to say, okay, so how can we help companies do more and set goals that are at the right level? I'm going to delve down into a few areas now and bring this alive for you. So first of all, gender. We can see that even today, only 5% of the Fortune Global 500 are led by a female CEO, only 5%. And at the rate we're going at the moment, it's going to take 257 years to close the gender pay gap. So long way off actually having equal pay. But if we had 6 simple pro-female actions on pay and conditions, we could close 2/3 of that gap by 2030. So quite simply, relatively simple things to put in place. We know that we could really drive action on gender. Secondly, look at climate. We know that 34% of companies, of large companies, have a public net zero target of some point, and that's up 7% from 2020. So good progress. But not all of these have a credible target aligned to confirmed by science-based targets. So still more to be really clear about that. And yet we know that we could create 395, so nearly 400 million jobs by transitioning to a nature-positive economy. So it's a business case. It's a right thing for us to do. We just need to get more companies at that net zero goal. Now, I'm looking at living wage. We know that 1/3 of all workers today earn less than they need to afford a decent standard of living. That's just crazy. And yet, we could lift 26 million people out of working poverty by collective action on living wage across agriculture, mining, fishing, forestry, and manufacturing. Forgetting everything else, that's 26 million if we could do collective action on living wage there. So again, it's in our hands. How do we set the right kind of targets? Then let's look at water. Well, the CDP respondents, which many of the global compact companies are, only 12% of them have water pollution goals. So still more to do. And yet we know that we could take 133 billion cubic meters. We could save that by preventing just 20% of the water lost in the 5 most water withdrawing countries. So if we focused on them, we could make a big impact relatively quickly. And finally, let's look at sustainable finance and financing. The team mentioned to you earlier, Michael mentioned to you earlier on that actually we had a look at earnings calls and saw the trends here. And what we see is for the first time, 2022, we're seeing less mentions of SDGs in earnings calls. So something's happening there, which is really crazy because when you look at MSCI World Financial Index, they have shown that over 5-year annualized shareholder return is at 36% for the most sustainable companies versus 5% on average. So really a focus on this is good for business, is driving shareholder value, and will drive investment. So again, we should be focusing more on making sure our investments are aligned to the SDGs. So what we've done is focusing on those areas: gender, climate, living wage, water resilience, and finance and investment. We've launched a set of goals where we've identified what the target for a business should be. We call this Forward Faster. The more companies that join us, going faster and higher on their ambition, will be more likely to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals in the next 7 years. So the first side of this is companies commit, take action to a number of targets under these 5 areas. They will be tracked. We will be tracking this to 2030. We're supporting companies with initiatives, support, tools, learning, training, peer learning, etc., to help companies make that goal, and also to be really public about the companies that are taking a lead. But the second part, also very importantly, is leading companies who are joining Forward Faster. We will be working with them at a national and a regional and a global level to advocate for policy globally and then at a national level to help these companies make the action and take the action to deliver these goals aligned, so that the country that you're working in has an enabling environment to enable companies to make these goals. And this is very important, and I'll show you here before. You've seen a little bit of this earlier on. 80% of business leaders say there are insufficient policy incentives to achieving the SDGs. So we're really clear that in the next 7 years, these companies, we need to work together to push for the right policies for governments to make sure that we can actually do the work and deliver the plans that we want. And the set of data here is really interesting. We know that 71% of companies would favor adjusting the national minimum wage to equal a living wage. That's really significant around the world. Companies want this. If governments would set the policy, it gives them a level playing field. Secondly, 65% would be happy for a mandatory disclosure on gender pay gap. In some countries, that's the case. So we can advocate for this. And 62% would be happy for a requirement of all business to reach a net zero emission 2030. So really, a lot of interest in making this progress. And so therefore, we would like to work with companies to advocate for the changes that would enable them to do the work. So anyone who's interested, we're happy to help answer any more questions, but we really encourage any companies to join. Sign up on our website. The QR code here shows you how to do it. You can commit onto gender, climate, living wage, water resilience, or sustainable finance and investment. And we're going to show you a quick video about that.
I think there is a world market for making.
The automobile is a fad, a novelty. Horses are here to stay.
I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers.
Women cannot do men's work.
Sustainability is important, but we have more urgent issues.
History has taught us that the leaders who succeed are the ones who meet the needs of the future by moving forward.
To achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, we need forward thinkers. Those who see the SDGs as a driver of growth, not reputation. Who are busy making progress, not just pledges. Who know sustainability is the future, not a trend.
Because right now, only 15% of the SDGs are on track for 2030. Some are even moving backwards. And the majority of businesses aren't setting bold enough targets.
Forward Faster is here to guide companies on the areas where they can make the biggest, fastest impact for 2030.
Because sustainable companies give us the best chance of achieving the SDGs. But we need you to take more ambitious action.
The people and planet of tomorrow are relying on the forward thinkers and doers of today. Don't fall behind the times. Move forward faster.
You think they're gonna do it?
Great. So that's a little bit of background about the Forward Faster initiative. And now I think that's all the presentation information that we've got for you. Happy to follow up with any more questions, etc. Actually, I should be joined by my colleagues now. We have a few questions already. I'm going to open up with those, and then anyone keep any questions coming. So the first question, I think over to you, Michael. We have a question about the methodology of the survey, it being a perception survey, which it's not. It's got all sorts of different methodologies in the survey, but the question really is, in the perception part, in the survey piece, is it private sector, public sector? What is the makeup of the participants who have given us the data?
Sure. Yeah, as you said, Stu, it's a pretty robust survey, so I'm actually going to give it over to Amelia, who was really in depth on this particular one.
Absolutely. So when we sent out the survey, as Michael mentioned originally, we did want to make sure that we were covering a range of different sources of information to be able to answer the question of what is the contribution of the private sector. Now, in the survey in particular, we did send it out to global business leaders everywhere. So we had over 2,800 responses from over 100 countries, 17% of which were in Asia specifically. Now, in terms of the makeup of who answered this, it was all private sector because we did want to make sure to focus on the private sector's not only perceptions of, for example, if we'll reach the SDGs and their faith in that, but also to better survey and understand what are the actions they're taking, not only in terms of are they taking action, but if you look even deeper into the report, what are the actions that they are taking in nature, in social equity, in governance, and more. And so this is a survey that was only targeted to the private sector to be able to answer some of those questions. Hopefully I responded to demographics question there, but yes, it is very exciting. And if you are at all interested in deep diving more, we do actually have all the demographics displayed in the report itself in the appendix.
Great, thanks so much. So I have another question now from Asia Oceania, and lots of different questions in it. So I'm going to kick off with some answers, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleagues on Accenture, see what their point of view on it is as well. So first of all, the question is grounded in the ISO standards. So they are a valuable guidance towards all goals, and a good impact tool for organizations to adopt for the SDGs. And one question is, why are companies hesitant to embrace ISO standards? So number one, why? Secondly, could it be made mandatory for certain segments? Who should take the lead? And what can the private sector do here? So I'm going to give an answer, and then I'd be also interested to hear from my colleagues at Accenture. So number one, why are not organizations hesitant to embrace ISO standards? So first of all, I would say there are so many standards. There are so many reporting frameworks, initiatives. I would say that companies who are keen to take action and drive are looking for some standard. That I don't think they're necessarily hesitant to one or the other. They're just like a bit overwhelmed by all the different standards that there are. So that's the first point. And I think companies are looking for something very clear, very uniform. There's enough work to be done to actually drive these changes without spending too much time reporting. So I wouldn't think it's about not being keen. It's just about the complexity and to choose what's the right framework. It's the first one. Can it be made mandatory? At the end of the day, what is mandatory? It's, I guess, within a country, it's a legal provision. That's the only thing that is mandatory is what's the consequence of you not doing something? It would have to be illegal. So that has to be a national thing. It's national governments that can do it, or on a regional basis. For instance, the EU has the EU standards that they're requiring companies to report, not against the target, but to disclose. So it has to be done by governments if you're to make something mandatory. And the question, therefore, is who should take the lead? If you want it to be mandatory, it has to be a government. It has to be the EU, or it has to be your national government. So that would have to be where the lead is. And what can the private sector do? I would say the most important thing is to understand the prevailing regulations, and it's complicated, but the simplest thing is to see what's coming out of the EU, because that's driving, it's the front of regulation. And then secondly is to really understand across the board of the principles, so covering all areas of social, governance, and the environment, making sure that you're doing the most simple, effective process possible. And then where you want to make more goals, then maybe you look at a sector basis, what's important to the sector. But really, the most important thing to do is to say what's really material to my organization, and how do I disclose on those few clear things that are going to drive forward, that are material to my business, and therefore the impact that my business is having. So a long way of answering those questions, but that was our first thought. And I'd be keen to hear Michael or Amelia if you have more to add to that.
Yeah, I think you did a great job to really underpinning a lot of those different elements that play when it comes to ISO standards. I would say I would really emphasize that point around complexity. There is so much general noise around reporting, both mandatory as well as voluntary disclosures for companies, that I think it's very challenging for them to navigate that, not only across different industry groups, but different countries. I think it's really starting to overwhelm them. And so it's hard to really map the systems to each other. I know there are some efforts to consolidate the overall sustainability reporting, but it's just a very complex landscape. It's constantly changing. The demands and the regulations on business are really providing an emphasis around where they need to move. So I think, to Sue's comment, unless it's being driven by the governments and they're kind of regulatorily required to disclose, I think that's probably where we'll see more movement in terms of adoption of ISO standards or other sustainability reporting standards.
Yep. I'm going to jump to another one while we're on this question of reporting and then come back to other questions. We have one about impact scoring and the varying reporting standards, EU CSRD, GRI standards, etc. And the question is, how do the UN Global Compact measure companies across the board on their sustainability? And will that be jurisdiction specific? So just to step back again, not repeating the same thing, that we know there's many standards, different issues around. The thing that the UN Global Compact does is make sure that we have a comprehensive reporting process which goes across all those areas: anti-corruption, environment, human rights, and labor principles. And they are a requirement as part of the Global Compact to report on every year. It makes sure that companies are really looking holistically across all the board, their social, their governance, and environmental impacts. And the questions that the Global Compact requires in its communication on progress are aligned to the EU reporting requirements, because they are required. So we work with the team who are pulling together the EU reporting standards and make sure that the core of those are the ones that the UN Global Compact requires. If any company is aligned to what is required by the EU, they will be more than enough completing what the UN Global Compact's communication on progress is. So those are the things that we will be asking, and then there will be chance for companies to volunteer higher levels of reporting if they want in our communication on progress. So that's the main ones that we have on reporting, I think. Quick look. Yes. So one more question, maybe to you, Amelia, about the survey. Did it include the hospitality industry?
It did. A quick answer there. Yes, it did. And we do have a breakdown. If you look at the retrospective, so looking back at what Michael said, there's two elements of the report: the retrospective and the forward-looking. For the retrospective, we have a 4-page spread per SDG. And during that, we not only break down how the private sector is contributing positively and negatively to each of the SDGs, but we actually break it down by sector as well. I believe the hospitality industry rolls up to a sector, but we do have the industry and sector breakdowns in the appendix as well.
Great. Now, a question about Forward Faster. Do companies have to be participating at the UN Global Compact to sign up for one of the areas or all of the areas? Yes, they do, and I'll explain why. Because it's critical for the companies who are taking a lead in these are leading companies. They're companies who are really leading the agenda, leading the world. It's critical that they are looking across all the principles. So it's not good enough for a company to be a leader on climate without considering its labor and its human rights issues. So that's why we require companies to commit to those principles, commit to report every year through our communication on progress, and then to lead in a particular area. So it's really to make sure that companies are really looking across the board, social, governance, as well as environment. So yeah, it's important that companies sign the Global Compact in order to do Forward Faster. very simple question about finding the report. The report is available. It's on the UN Global Compact website. You can download it. It's absolutely complete there. And again, any questions about it, please do come back to us. Impact scoring. Wow. SDG matching. These are the products in the private sector to identify SDGs that need more attention. So question on SDG matching, interesting one. Public and private sector, how are they identifying which SDGs need more attention, which is oversubscribed? How do we align on that? So I'm going to give a broad overview, but then again, pass over to Michael as well. I think the most important thing isn't necessarily what's oversubscribed or whatever. I mean, it's really what's material to the business. It's really business to say, this is where my business is material. This is the impact that I'm having on the world. And therefore, that's the effort that I should be putting in, because it's most important what the business itself, the impact the business itself is having on the world and is having on its own business results. And that's where each organization should be focusing, not necessarily looking at how to fix the problems out there, making sure that you run your business in a way that's really good for the business and is not having a negative impact on the world. Michael, any thoughts to add on top of that one?
Yeah, I think your point, Sue, is spot on, where it's really trying to think through where is your most significant impact as an organization. I think particularly if you think about the various industries represented on this call today, the impact an agricultural company will have versus a chemicals company versus a consumer goods company are all going to be very different. And so your way to contribute to the SDGs will vary. So through programs like SDG Ambition or others offered by the Global Compact, you can really identify what those are for you. But yeah, I don't think there's an oversubscription to the SDGs at the moment. We're off track on 85%. So you have your choice of ones to contribute to. So I think kind of free reign on that. But Amelia, any other comments from you on this one?
I would say that companies do need to go through a prioritization exercise. I will say in the report, it was also interesting looking at the macro level. There are some SDGs that are being impacted more by the private sector, whether that be positively or negatively, depending on the SDG itself, as well as SDGs that the private sector is reporting more on. And these do align with what the private sector oftentimes views as its role. So a lot around economic development, responsible consumption, et cetera. And so there we can see where action is being taken. However, I do think that there is a lot of differences sector by sector.
Yeah, that's right. And also regionally, there are some, well, like the African continent, they're not the emitters. So they've got to really understand what's the impact my business is having or not having, and where should I be putting my efforts. Great. Now I have another question here about, we only have 6 more years to go, and what are the roadmap and strategies to accelerate ambitious targets, and who would be charged in monitoring the tracking? So there's lots of reporting and tracking going forward. We have introduced the Forward Faster initiative precisely for this reason, because at the moment, there is no organization saying this is how high you need to jump. This is the level that you need to be at. And that is what Forward Faster has very specific targets. So by 2050, the commitment is to have a gender balance at all management levels, 50-50. And to have a commitment on equal pay for equal value work by 2050, so 2030, sorry, very clear targets. And that's why we have Forward Faster. That's the whole reason we've put these targets out there. They are clear, they are time-bound, and they are an absolute level. Living wage, again, is a target for our decent work target. So that's exactly why we've done that. We will be monitoring them for the next 7 years. It will be tracked, it will be public, the leading companies will drive more progress towards it, and will show the way for the private sector to make these changes. So this is the simplest. Now, at the moment, there are these goals. Potentially, we could add some more, for instance, as the SBTN initiative moves forward, and we drive our Think Lab work on biodiversity. Potentially, we could add that, but that's not clear enough to have a clear target yet. But we will be we'll be adding that. So I would say the Forward Faster is the clearest way to be setting public targets. More questions. How are we doing for time? Yeah, a little bit more. I have a question here. Was the construction sector also covered in the survey? Yeah.
Yes. Yes, sorry, I need to go off mute. Yes, it was. And I believe it also has some significant impacts as well. So the construction sector was also covered.
Great. And have a question here from Marla, Karen Alvarez. Oh, it's jumping in. Yes. Which is, are partnerships towards the goals working? Should there be more focus on this among industries, between large and smaller companies to impact and amplify the scope? Yes. Sorry, let me get back. Yes, I have an answer for that, and I'm also sure my colleagues will also help out on this as well. Increasingly, we definitely need to see action that goes from right through the supply chain, and from the beginning to the end of the supply chain, pre-production and also delivery. And that is definitely a focus going forward. And indeed, we will be launching an initiative on the whole food service, because in the UN Global Compact, we have people right from farming and tractors right the way through to retail, including production, fertilizer, etc. So there are ways that we can work together. And if all of those chain of organizations together are setting a climate goal of net zero, then that will have a significant impact. So yes, I think partnerships and actually working across the supply chain is a real factor that we'll be thinking about in the next 6 years, 7 years in order to get that. And then also we've again been working with our colleagues in Accenture to work out how to support small businesses in the supply chain. So even if we take just one company, how do we work with that company right across its supply chain to make impact? So indeed, this systems change is really something that we should be looking at. Michael, since you've been partner on our supply chain work.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, certainly as we think about the small and medium enterprises around the world, they are desperately trying to seek both knowledge, financing, and tools to take action on, climate, gender, other issues. But they really need their kind of buyers and the large organizations to set the goals and really help pull them along. So I do think there's something to be said where you can be a leading organization on your own right, really work within your own supply chain. But if we think about doing this at scale and really delivering by 2030, it does require coordination among multiple organizations. This is just too hard, to be honest. Like across all these issues, you as a single organization can do quite a bit. But to really deliver the scale of impact we need at a planetary level, we have to work together, whether that's within industry, across industry, within your own local communities. There's different ways to really think about partnerships. So I think we're trying to explore any and all that are available. Sue's point, we're thinking about the supply chains. You can think about different industry groups that are working quite closely. There's a lot of great examples in consumer goods and others that are thinking about different ways to think about packaging and truly trying to leverage their buying power to make significant differences. But there's a lot of different ways to go about partnerships. And I think we desperately need more, not fewer. Amelia, any thoughts from you on this one?
I think the wonderful thing here is also having discussed this with several business leaders through surveys, through interviews, et cetera. A lot of them are recognizing this and taking action. Partnerships is somewhere that they're really focusing in on, because it's a good way to make sure that not one person being left behind, but also not one company is taking all the risk as well. Because a lot of times pushing forward this progress can be at times a risk. And so making sure that as a collective unit, an industry comes up with standards that they all agree on, that they are all demanding the same thing from their suppliers, that they are all reporting the same things externally, and really collaborating for that change is a way to push forward, is a way to spread the risk, is a way to make sure that you peer pressure others into also taking those actions at times. So it really is one of the most effective tools that we've seen. I would say the one thing is to make sure that those partnerships are being streamlined by industry. There are at times too many partnerships to choose from. And so one item that is being helpful in terms of the UN Global Compact having 5 distinct areas that you can sign up for, and other industry partnerships is trying to cut through some of the noise that exists in some of the partnerships that exist currently.
Thank you. Right, we are going to wrap up now. Thank you very much for all your interest and dialogue. We are going to follow up on all these questions, by the way. We will answer them all. There's one final quick one here. I just do want to respond to Suman Majumdar, which is some companies don't prioritize this because they don't understand. Well, that makes total sense to me. But I would say that is what the Global Compact can help you. We have accelerator programs, again, really great one, which we do with the Accenture team here, to really help you understand, how is this practical? How does this really drive my business? How do I innovate behind it? So I would say those are the things that we can really help you with. We are going to share all of this information. We will answer more of these questions in depth. We will give you the recording of the survey, of this webinar, a link to the actual survey, but also we will give you a breakout of the survey for Asia Pacific, so you can actually see in more depth the data for this region. And again, open to any other questions or help as you go forward. And again, clicking and looking in from the Forward Faster initiative, you will find the targets and the goals, but you'll also see a implementation documentation for every single target. So you'll be able to understand the resources, the help, the accelerator programs, the peer learning, etc., that we can do to help companies make that progress. So once again, thank you very much to Michael and Amelia, also to my friends on the back end here, Tim, who's been helping run the webinar, and Bo and Sean, who helped pull together the survey. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining and engaging. And we really look forward to working with everyone to help move forward faster and deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care, all.